City. Rob D'Amico is a retired FBI supervisor and founder of Sierra One Consulting, which has done work on corporate security. Here in studio, NBC's Tom Winter. So let me start with the bullet casings, Tom, and these words that are written on them. What do we know about this?
Right. So, one of the things we have to keep in mind, we've got these words that are written on there. Does it speak to motive? Does it speak to a message that this suspect is trying to send? But it could also be a diversion, too. You have to consider those things as well. Does it have a broader meaning? What is this person going to do next? I think it's important, as soon as I say that, to say that the NYPD says, look, this is a targeted attack, obviously, clearly from the video and the images that we've been showing you and from everything that police have said that they've uncovered. Is there any indication he's going after any other individuals? No. But I think when you look at the totality of this investigation at this point, it's clear that this person was on a particular mission and that they were definitely going after this person. What type of message they were trying to send, why they were doing that, what they were up to leading up to it is something that obviously NYPD and the Detective Bureau is going over right now. One of the things they've uncovered in the course of that is the images that we're looking at on screen. This coming from a hostel on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where apparently he had stayed at one point. And so they were able to get this.
Do we know if he was there the night before?
The specific timing is just some reporting. We're still in the process of double checking and verifying. But detectives had been at this location. They looked at the surveillance video. And it's one of the few times, apparently, where he is without that mask pulled up that we're seeing here. And those were still images that were gathered off of surveillance video at the Starbucks. As you referenced, Chris, at some point he goes in there, purchases 2 either protein or energy type bars from the Starbucks, purchases a bottle of water, discards them according to video. So here's what the NYPD has to do. Because you can imagine how many water bottles are in a New York City trash can on a corner or the side of a street. They have to go to the Starbucks, say, okay, which way did he go when he left the Starbucks? Let's go to the next business. Do we have any video there? Okay, he's going this direction. He's walking down the block, and go so on and so forth down the block. And this is all prior to the shooting, to be able to figure out where was he. And then they see on video at a certain point, oh, he just tossed this in the trash, or he just threw this on the side of the sidewalk. We've got to immediately go there and see if it's there and see if it matches up, because you have to have some sort of sense of chain of custody of that evidence to make sure, oh, it's that water bottle. It's the only water bottle of that type in the same location where he threw it in the trash bag. So that's the type of actual shoe leather work that goes into it by the Detective Bureau. And one of the things that's changed so much over the years, and this is something the new police commissioner did when she was at the NYPD previously, Jessica Tisch, is to put all this information on NYPD smartphones. So what's happening is they're reviewing the evidence, looking over this video. They're in their vans and their cars that we see on the street, and then they're sending it to the detectives, and they're saying, hey, look, right here, it's this trash can located at this address. You should go there right now and see if you can find it. And that's the type of work that's being done. It speeds up investigation. It's one of the reasons why over the past couple of years, particularly these high-profile cases, and particularly in Midtown Manhattan, where there are so many cameras and surveillance video that exist, they're able to eventually get to a point where they can put somebody in custody or at least determine who that individual is. So that's the type of work that's going on right now. That's the type of work that was going on mostly yesterday. For sure, they're ahead of where they were at. And so that's the type of information that as reporters we're trying to gather. We'll see how lucky we are at that.
Yeah, Priscilla, we know that this is a city where there are cameras everywhere. What else do we know about trying to put together the pieces to hopefully catch up with this guy?
Yeah, well, all of this surveillance footage could be key in helping to bring this manhunt to an end and bring the suspected gunman in for a number of reasons. One is that you now have this new surveillance video that you all were just discussing, where you see very clearly this suspected gunman's face unmasked. And so you can imagine that those images are going to be all over TV screens, all over newspapers. And so they could potentially lead to some leads in figuring out where that person is now, or if he's being seen anywhere now. But the other thing is that the NYPD is going to be able to run that through their facial recognition software and potentially get some hits there that could lead them further along in their investigation. But also, as they're collecting this surveillance video, they're able to interview people who may have seen the suspected gunman or spoken to the suspected gunman. And so they're getting a fuller picture of where exactly this individual was in the hours and potentially days leading up to this crime, and also where that person could be now, which is, of course, all going to be crucial in bringing this to an end and ultimately getting that person under arrest. Chris?
Priscilla, thank you for that. So, Rob, police have video of the suspect before, during, and after the shooting. They know the escape route he took. You can see it where he was last seen in Central Park. But even with all of this photographic evidence, what are the challenges? I think, you know, when you listen to Tom's description, this is a police department that's really good at this, and yet this guy's still on the loose.
Well, New York City's huge, and there's so many people in there. So I think that there's three parts. Yesterday, they're trying to identify the person, and the fingerprints on the water bottles that may be in the trash can can help identify him. Now that they have a full picture of his face, they can use facial recognition to identify. Then they have to locate. So putting this picture out allows the public who may not know him to at least identify him, where he's been seen, where he may go next. And then there's parts of the investigation that will go to court. Like the water bottle fingerprints may not really be relevant in the court, but the fingerprints on the rounds that were stripped out there. So there was 3 shell casings and they had writing on them, but there were also 3 live rounds. If you look at the video, the gun malfunctions, he clears it, and he put live rounds on the ground. He probably loaded that magazine without gloves on. So those rounds that have fingerprints actually go into the case to put him at the place with that weapon, with those rounds, and that's really critical on when it goes to court. Everything else, identify, locate, and then later on the trial. So there's so much going on now, and that's why NYPD is huge, but it's also a huge city. If he got out of the immediate city quickly, then that's even more problems. Now you're into manhunt in multiple states.
So let me start with the ID part of it, because we talked about the water bottle, the protein energy bars that were thrown out by the gunman after his visit to Starbucks. Whether it's fingerprints or whether it's DNA, how much of the population is actually on databases that law enforcement can access so that there might be a match?
It's surprising how long. Fingerprints are probably the quickest. DNA takes a little bit more time. Fingerprints, actually, if you can get them to an examiner, the latent prints are run, then they sent to CGIS, and they have a computer model, and then they have examiners. If he got that suppressor legally, that has to be a federal stamp through the ATF, and it requires certain things. So he could have put fingerprints in for that. He could have put fingerprints in for something else. Obviously, I don't think he, like this hardened criminal, but he may have applied to things that have required fingerprints that are going to be in the system. So fingerprints are going to be first. DNA takes a little bit of time, but they may put it in there, and they may get a hit on it from like, you know, one of these, even the DNA ancestry kits that come up. So they're going to do all of it at the same time and see which one happens first.
So, Priscilla, we have reporting that Brian Thompson didn't have a security detail, despite his wife said there were threats against him. What do we know about that?
Right. So in that video, you see him walking alone. He doesn't appear to have security on the sidewalk just behind me. And that is pretty rare for the CEO of a major company when they are traveling, particularly when they're headed to a publicly advertised shareholder meeting. And as you noted, you add on top of that the fact that his wife tells NBC News that there were threats against him that he had told her about, and that she said there may have been some sort of a lack of coverage. So it's unclear right now whether he was offered coverage, whether he declined that coverage. We don't exactly know, but it's one of the things that we're trying to get to the bottom of, is if he should have had security, and if so, why he didn't perhaps have that security, and sort of if there was any shortcoming there. Chris?
As people, Rob, who are in charge of a big company, Brian Thompson had a pretty low profile, but his company's revenue last year, $281 billion. He was also a top executive in the parent company. And then again, these reports of threats. As someone who is experienced in consulting for corporate security, are you surprised that he didn't have security? What's sort of the level of decision making that happens around?
I am, and I'm not. There's so many companies that have it, and there's a lot of them that don't. Security never produces revenue, so it's always first thing to be questioned or cut. Some companies really realize that their CEO, if something happens to their CEO, even something as dramatic as this, or even if they're some type of investigation, they realize if a CEO that's been in there a while that the market likes gets killed or is has an investigation that's bad, their stock's going to go down. So a lot of boards require it, especially with the expense of security, that the board has to approve it. And especially now, like when you have in a public event and he's going somewhere that he's going to be known, he might not be known on the street, but he's going to be at this event. I do assessments all the time where I evaluate if they have security, is it the right amount of security? Is it in the right positions? Or if they don't have security, what really makes sense? Because you don't want to have like 8 guys on him when he's in a building that requires 5 or 6 badges to get into. But when he's alone at something like this, if he had security, like one person with him to do things, well, maybe an event like this, you up it to 3 or 4 because it's publicly knowledge that he's going to be there. And especially with all the denials, I think there's going to be some liability on the board if they knew about threats and they didn't offer it to him. If he turned it down, that's one thing. But a lot of these folks, they understand it. I do a lot of it, and they just kind of say, hey, it's something I need, and they put up with it.
To remind you that 60%